Hello, my name is Nate. You may know me as the Voidwalker, and if you're listening to this, you're probably on my YouTube channel, so thank you for that. What I'm going to do here, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for quite some time now, and been creating the worlds in the role of a DM for quite some time. I've run a few pre-built campaigns as well, and I'm at the moment currently hosting a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, which I will be posting up on my YouTube channel, the videos of after I've got around to editing them. Unfortunately, we didn't get the video capture going for the first episode, so I'm sort of editing it to some images which will show you what you're missing visually, but I did record all the audio. So what we're going to do is, before that comes out, I wanted to give you a quick overview and a quick history, if you will, of the my version of the Frogotten Realms, which is the setting where our campaigns take place. I'll go into a bit of history with the characters, the player characters which have appeared in the previous campaigns I've played, because they are going to tie in to this upcoming campaign, which is going to be up on the YouTube channel. So I first started playing D&D with my now wife, Katie, and my brother-in-law, Tim. It was just the two of them as players, and me as the Dungeon Master when we first started. We started out trying to play physically on tabletops, so we didn't record that campaign. We then sort of made the transition to virtual tabletops. That campaign sort of petered out a little bit after a few sessions, just because of some of the limitations of the software and hardware we were using at the time, and also with just trying to schedule us into having the same time scales to be able to do it. So this is before we've discovered Roll20, which we now use, which has made it immeasurably easier. So basically what happened in this campaign was, this one wasn't actually set in the Frogotten Realms. I created my own sort of material plane, if you will. So the way it works in Dungeons and Dragons, in my sort of larger universe anyway, is you have different planes of existence which exist alongside each other. So obviously you've got the main material plane, which is usually where most campaigns happen, and then you've got the Feywild and the Shadowfell, which are sort of dark. The Shadowfell's the dark sort of mirror image of the material plane, and the Feywild is the sort of magical fairy and fey mirror of a material plane. And then you have like the other sort of demi-planes around that, like the Abyss and the Nine Hells and the Upper Planes and all sorts. So what drew me to the Frogotten Realms was that it embraces the sort of idea that there are all these different planes which are going on. And what drew me to Dungeons and Dragons, and which I feel has become even better in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, is the interchangeability of these planes. You get people who can walk and move between these planes. So I really like the Frogotten Realms because I've played a lot of the Old Baldur's Gate games, Icewind Dale games. I've read a few of the books set in there as well. There's quite a lot of history there for me. I really like the sort of rich, high fantasy sort of thing which goes on in the Frogotten Realms. I do love the old sort of sword and sorcery types of the Greyhawk setting as well. I used to I was brought up playing Hero Quest with my dad and my uncle and my aunt and my mum and my sister, and that's a very sort of like sword and sorcery, you're in it for the money, sort of grey morals type game. Which is a lot more sort of dungeon crawls and stuff. But what I like about the Frogotten Realms is it's got a bit more political intrigue, a bit more non-combat NPC sort of stuff, which I enjoy. So anyway, the first campaign, we had two characters. There was Tuin, who was Tim's character, and there was Vistra, who was Katie's character. So Tuin was a human warlock, And this was back in 4th edition as well. We were playing this, so the characters worked slightly differently. And Vistra was a dwarven, I think dwarven fighter. She was champion fighter, yeah. And they had come to this island, to a place called Greenhaven. They'd heard that mercenaries were being hired to fight in a great war between the human civilizations which were trying to settle and the dark elf civilizations who had been living in the north of where they were trying to settle. And in this campaign, the dark elves weren't drow. They were like high elves who had gone bad. So they're not that sort of dark elves. They were light skinned, pale, but very dark hair, black hair. They were sort of northern light ice elves, kind of a bit like moon elves in the Forgotten Realms. They were what they called the Dark Realms in my created area. So they came to this harbour city, and they met a wizard, a historian called Aldwin, who was said that he would travel with them north. They were given a mission to try and discover what was behind the Dark Elf attacks. There had been an army which had come through, which seemed to have gone missing, and they hadn't heard anything from the front lines. So they wanted to send up Aldwin to record what had happened and report back to the human empires. So he offered to join the players, and they made their way up north. They first came to a sort of farmhouse which was off a beaten track, and they had an encounter with a werewolf who in the fight actually slew Aldwin, and they sort of had to, the players were quite upset. Tim and Katie felt quite bad that they'd lost this sort of quite friendly sort of mage who was quite helpful. They travelled up further north and found a battle site where there had been a massive battle between elves and this human army, and basically the human army had been wiped out, and many elves had been as well. What happened was they were then attacked by a group of dark elves who managed to make off with Vistra, and who managed to abduct her. But they left behind a book, which was a book of portals, which allowed Tuin to travel back and forth between different places. He managed to travel back to the town, get himself some healing potions, and come back and mount a rescue for Vistra. And he managed to rescue her from a dark elf prison. There was also a traitor dark elf who was being held in this prison, who said that he would help them, and he helped lead them out of this prison if he could come with them, basically. So they escaped this prison, but they ended up getting cornered, and they used the Book of Portals to teleport them away, and they managed to teleport outside of this prison, and they found themselves in a halfling tribal village, but these weren't your sort of like jovial, sort of stoic Lord of the Rings style halflings. They weren't hobbits by any means. They were quite a cannibalistic tribe of savage halflings, which I quite like the idea of. I kind of stole that a bit from, there's the Dark Sun setting, which is all based in a very savage frontiers desert area, and I read in the Dark Sun setting for 4th edition about these savage halflings who were carnivores, and I thought, you know what, that's a really nice different spin on a halfling, because they're always these good, lovely like people. So I thought, why not? Let's just have some cannibalistic halflings in here. So in the end, they managed to persuade the halflings that they were worth keeping alive and not to eat them. If they could get some meat for the halflings. So they attacked a nearby orc tribe and butchered them and took back the meat to the halflings. Because of this, they gave them their mightiest warrior to travel with them, who was, I can't remember his name, but he was a halfling who was more animal than man, and didn't really talk, just kind of like gnawed and made weird noises. They then had to discover what was going on with these dark elves and why they were attacking. They'd found in the prison a letter which pointed towards this malign being, which was only known by the name The Mistress to the players in the paperwork they found. They decided there were signs pointing towards the Shadowfell, so they decided they'd travel to the Shadowfell using the Book of Portals they'd gathered. It went slightly awry. The way I created the Book of Portals was that they would roll, and there was a chance that it would go wrong, and it did go wrong. So they got teleported to a pocket hell dimension, and in this pocket hell dimension was a demon, and the demon fought with them, and when they came to a bit of a standoff. The demon was really beat up, but so were they. The demon offered them a deal for its life. It offered them a deal that they could sacrifice one of their own to restore Aldwin. And the party decided, Vistra and Tuin, that they would sacrifice this cannibalistic halfling who had joined them, because obviously he wasn't a very nice person. He hadn't been overly helpful to them as yet, and it seemed like the lesser of evils to get back a ally who, although dead, had been more kind-natured. So they made this deal, and the demon, good to its word, restored Alduin to them and ate the halfling and then disappeared. And they travelled through the portal again and escaped out to a town in the Shadowfell. They found themselves deep underground in a sewer system and had a bit of a run-in with a vampire, in which Aldwin managed to fight off the vampire with magic which seems slightly different. His magic seems slightly darker. It was more similar to the warlock, to Tuin's warlock-like magic, and that sort of raised a few eyebrows. And that is where our campaign ended, because we, due to trying to sort out fixtures and stuff, we just didn't get a chance to sort of finish off that story. So that was kind of left on the back burner a bit. And then obviously I discovered Roll20, and I discovered that it was much easier to create maps in there than the software we had been using, and it was a much more intuitive system, and also 5th edition came out as well, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this another go. So I gathered some of my friends at the time. Tim was one of them, and Katie, my wife, was another one, and we also mentioned to my friend George, who was who I worked with at the time. He was my manager, that we'd be doing this, and he joined up as well. So we thought, okay, this is good, we've got a party of 3 now. And I also mentioned it to my friend Ben, who was just getting into doing some streaming, and we thought, it could be quite fun if we sort of streamed our adventures. So that's how it started out, really. We got together and I started writing the campaign. We did a pre-built campaign for the first one, which was the Mines of Phandalin campaign, which is a sort of level 1 to 5 module from Wizards of the Coast. So obviously, because it all came together quite quickly, I didn't have time to sort of create my own world and my own campaign. So it worked quite well that I could just bolt this module into Roll20 and go, basically. I just need to read up on the PDFs and the quests and familiarise myself with the characters, and put my own little spin on it a little bit and fit it into my own version of the Frogotten Realms. So yeah, we ran that campaign. It went pretty well. They did well. They chose their characters, so it was new characters. Tim was playing a character called Noah Blessed, who was a half-elf cleric, and who later multi-classed into a fighter as well. We had Ben was playing Grum Blackguard, who was a orc berserker, and we had George playing Greydifidus Short Tankard, who was a halfling rogue, and then Katie was playing a dragonborn sorcerer called Mithril. And they were really strong characters, actually. I really liked them. It was a good mix. It made for a good dynamic. They worked quite well for sort of like random carnage from Ben and the lopping off bits of creatures for trophies, and that sort of played off the very sort of like tight-laced character of Noah quite well, and there was a bit of confrontation there, which was good. It made for some good storytelling. And Grader for the Short Tankard was a very interesting character. He got on very well with Grum, and he was quite mercurial in nature. And then you've got Mithril, who was quite Katie played her as quite sort of straight-laced as well, but with a sort of dark, dry sense of humour, which was really good. That all worked very well. So they did quite well. They battled through the dungeons of Phandalin. For a lot of them, they took down the Red Brands, who were a band of brigands who had taken over the running of a town. They managed to eliminate Glassstaff, who was the head of these brigands, and they also went and overthrew the Mayor Weston, who was not a very good mayor, and they decided to sort of push to the forefront Halia Thornton, who was just a merchant down in the miners' exchange, and she had sort of like ties to the Zentarim, who were a sort of spy network, and Grader for the Short Tankard sort of joined up with her, and through mainly his actions sort of pushed her to the forefront of the political side, and she took over mayorship of the town, which is not something which was technically written into the pre-built campaign, but it's something I quite liked. I like to give the option to my players that they can change the world around them. So they did that. They also fought a green dragon. There's one section in the Mines of Phandalin which, reading up on forums, is a very popular TPK area, total party kill area, and that happened. They all got taken down by this dragon, rather than sort of trying to strike a deal with it or trying to avoid the dragon. They went headlong in and just got absolutely incinerated. So I was sat with a decision: what to do. Either they're dead, or I write up some reason why they're not. They wanted to continue playing those characters, so I wrote up a reason why they weren't. And I had the nearby druid, who was on the same map, had hauled them away and managed to restore them to life in time. But I wanted there to be a consequence for them dying. I always think that if there's a total party wipe, if you're going to allow the party to survive, there has to be bad consequences for their deaths, caused by their deaths. So what I had happen, which was all outside of the module, this was all additional to the module, I had the dragon attack Phandalin, their main base of operations, the town they had been questing in. And I had it destroy and wipe out a lot of the NPCs, including Sildar, who was their main sort of quest giver outside of Halia. And I had it kill a load of the Barthen die. I think had to shut down. No, Barthen didn't die. Had to shut down his building. Toblin, the innkeeper, his inn was destroyed. His wife and daughter killed. He then blames the characters and got in a confrontation with Grum, who then knocked him out, and so he left. So the town was really sort of, I made my own image of Phandalin, which diverted away from what was on the map. So I had to sort of remap and alter the map, and to show the damage the dragon had done, and had to alter little bits of the quest line to, obviously, didn't have Sildar in there anymore. He was dead. He died fighting off the dragon. He became the hero of Phandalin. So he sort of became this sort of mythical hero who everyone in the town sort of said saved them from this dragon. The party decided to, quite wisely, keep it stum that the dragon attacked as retribution to them attacking him. But that was quite interesting for them to play with. They had this level of guilt then. Grum especially, it felt immense guilt over what had happened, which would lead to, I think, some of the decision making which sort of defined the end of that campaign. So they went to the Wave Echo mines because they'd been tasked to reopen these mines, basically. I pointed them there with the help of Halia, and some. There was also some paperwork I put aside, which they found with Glassstaff, pointing towards this character called the Black Spider, who was he's sort of the final boss of the campaign. So they made it into the Wave Echo Caves. They even wiped out the Black Spider, who happened to be a drow. He had also been had some doppelgangers who had been aiding him as well. So they wiped all of them out. But then they went to another section of the Wave Echo Caves, and they'd saved one of the dwarves. I think it was Gundren, who was their original employer. They'd saved him from the Black Spider, but they found themselves in a section of the Wave Echo Caves which was overrun with undead, and they were hurt. I don't think Noah was there for some reason. Possibly Tim couldn't play. But basically, it all went horribly wrong, and Grum died in a sort of last-ditched effort. He and Gundren sort of made their last stand against these waves of undead and told the other players to run. So after this immense guilt he'd felt, and this building sort of self-hatred Grum had been showing in a couple of episodes, which Ben portrayed so well, he became frustrated. He wanted to be a hero. That was what he dreamed to be, was a hero. And he saw this opportunity to be a hero, not to become famous, but to save his friends. And so he stayed behind with the help of Gundren, while the rest of the party managed to flee. And they got out alive because of it, but Grum didn't. So what happened then was, obviously the campaign came to an end, and I spoke to the players about what they wanted to happen with their characters. So George decided that Gray would retire from adventuring, because he felt that he would have taken the death of Grum too hard to be able to continue adventuring. But he decided that he'd like to use the wealth he had acquired in adventuring to open up a tavern called the Fallen Orc in Grum's honour. So I went, fine. There's this tavern which has just been destroyed by the dragon. You can rebuild on the site of that, and Gray will become the tavern keep for the Fallen Orc. So that was sort of the end. I say that with quotation marks because I'll go into it a bit later, of Gray's story. And what I wanted to do then was, I had an idea for another campaign I wanted to do called, I sort of jokingly called it CSI Neverwinter. And it kind of stuck, so we just called it that, where I wanted to do a murder mystery, like a sort of film noir style murder mystery, and that all the players would be members of the Watch. And I decided, I had a lot of other players who were saying they liked the sound of what we were doing, who wanted to join in. So I wrote this campaign based in Neverwinter, but there was a serial killer, and they had to solve clues and try and find him. Between doing that, I wrote a series of short stories about the characters, and I decided I'd release them on my YouTube channel. So if you look back to before this video, there's a fair few of them, called the Tales from the Forgotten Realms. That's set directly following that first campaign, and it sort of tells the stories of the people who were left behind. It tells you of Grey and how he travels to Neverwinter, and then he gets the supplies to go back to set up a tavern, and it's quite a sort of light-hearted story here as well, and it sort of wraps the character up quite nicely. And it's got the ongoing adventures of Mithril and Noah, who Noah has lost his faith due to Grum dying and due to all the things going badly as they did, and he took a hit to alignment as well. He went down to neutral from good due to some poor decisions made when rescuing some children, the Drendars. They were terrified, and instead of sort of soothing them and stuff, he just chucked them across a pit in the hope that they'd make it across. And due to that was the last sort of straw of a few questionable decisions made alignment-wise, which dropped him down to a neutral alignment. And I had like an interesting arc with Tim. I discussed where he wanted the character to go, and he said he wanted a sort of crisis of faith, and he wanted his character to fall back on his more martial soldier background. So that's when he multi-classed into fighter towards the tail end of the campaign. And this sort of in the Tales of the Forgotten Realms, I wrote some stories about him and Mithril going to sort of like regain his faith. So they travel back to where he first started to worship Soon, and who was his deity he got his clerical powers from. And they met one of his old teachers, and he managed to sort of regain his faith. And he was fighting some drow when we last heard of him in those tales, who were attacking the northern area he was in. I think it was Fireshire they went to. So that was quite an interesting dynamic, and him and Mithril worked really well together as characters, just the two of them as well. So I sort of built on that a little bit, and I built in a bit more of Mithril's history about how she had fled from her world, which had been burnt around her, and where there'd been tragedy there, and that she'd accidentally opened a portal to some demonic, the abyss basically, and demons had poured through, and she only barely escaped with her life. So it adds a bit to her backstory as well, which I thought was quite good. So I did that, and I also started to introduce back into the world Tuin, who is Tim's character from the first campaign, which we never recorded. So the story I did was that he woke up in the Forgotten Realms with no memory of how he got there, in a summoning circle. And I won't go into it too much, because you can watch the Tales from Forgotten Realms if you want to hear about it too much. But anyway, I started to weave this story about how he'd come from this different plane of existence, and how somehow there was something linked to Aldwin, who was the mage. And I started to build Aldwin as this villain, and I decided to tie him in to the CSI Neverwinter story. Basically what we had was this serial killer who was this young elf, and we never got to finish this campaign. We only got into to do one session because there were so many people playing in it. It was a large campaign, and we had about 6 or so players, and getting them all together on the same night was just impossible. So we only got one session on that. But what I had basically written was that there was this serial killer who was killing women, and I'd written in Aldwin as this manipulator of this young psychopath who he was manipulating to embrace his violent urges. So I started to build Aldwin as this background malevolent figure who was sort of the mastermind behind these things. Unfortunately, we didn't get to explore that storyline much, but I like things to still happen in my world. I like the world to be sort of a living, breathing thing. So the events which didn't happen, because that campaign didn't conclude, have had a knock-on effect onto the upcoming campaign. So what I then decided to do, I needed some time to start writing this campaign. I had this idea forming of this bigger overarching story and the direction I wanted it to go in, and how I would weave that into my version of Forgotten Realms. But I needed some time, and I had players who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. So we went back to just Tim had just had his daughter, my niece Penny, at the time, so he wasn't able to play. So it was just George, Ben, and Katie. So I thought, okay, I don't want to continue the main story because Tim's not a part of it, and I don't want to. He doesn't want to start a new character. If he wants to continue playing, he wants to continue playing with Noah, who is the character he's sort of built on, which is fair enough. So I thought, but I've got other players who do want to play, so we'll play a different pre-built campaign. So we decided we'd give the Curse of Strahd a go. So we got Katie, wanted to try something a bit different. So she played an evil character, neutral evil character called Winifred, who was a elf who had a very dark background, a lot of abuse and a lot of awful things had happened to her, which had led her to become the sort of slightly evil person she was. We had George playing Zyphirian Dagalish, who was a sort of hermit druid who was sort of socially awkward because he'd never really interacted with people. And then we had Ben playing a completely different sort of character to Grum, playing a bard, a halfling bard called Rhine. So they sort of plunged into the Curse of Strahd, and obviously the wonderful thing about Curse of Strahd is it's not based in the Forgotten Realms, it's not based in any of those realms, it's its own like little pocket dimension of Barovia, which sort of sits alongside the Shadow Realm as its own like pocket dimension. So I could do things in this campaign which wouldn't really have that much effect on what I was already penning for the next campaign. So it was quite good as a sort of time filler for us to do something while I was writing the campaign. So they got relatively far in it. There was some really interesting dynamic between Fred and the party, and between Fred and Strahd and the party. Obviously Strahd is evil, and Strahd's this powerful and enigmatic, always present villain. And I think I learned a lot about having a mastermind type villain through my playing of Strahd to the players, and how I learned a lot about horror and foreshadowing and how to build tension from playing Curse of Strahd. And I would recommend it to any DM who's wanting to learn some storytelling, is play a Curse of Strahd campaign. It's hard because there is a lot, and it's a bit vague in places of the direction. You kind of have to, players can go in so many directions and it's so open-ended. And the wonderful thing about it is you do a card reading and it's different every time you play it. So it was a really interesting campaign, and the dynamics worked really well between the party, and it made for such a tense episode when they finally found out that Fred was evil. And oh my god, the tension between her and Zyphirian. Rhine had got killed and resurrected as a were-raven unbeknownst to them. But these two, they were like fighting against each other, and then they had to sort of come back together and work out how they were going to operate now that they knew that Fred was evil, and it was brilliant. And then, unfortunately, after that, they very shortly after died. After that happened, they went to a tower, a trapped tower, which had a very powerful booby trap on a wagon outside. I don't want to tell too much because there are a few wagons in the campaign, but yeah, they opened a front door which they should not have opened and triggered a trap. They did not. They made like the number one mistake in D&D, which is they didn't check for traps before opening a door, which is a mistake you only make once in Dungeons and Dragons. So Fred opened the door and boom, total party wipe. And it was such a sort of violent and unexpected death that I put a line under and I said, okay, they're really dead this time. There's no coming back from that. I'd already sort of brought back Rhine as a were-raven. God, try saying that 3 times in a row. And I thought that's like your one and done. You know, I'll usually let people get like back once, maybe twice if it's only one person. But if it's a total party wipe, after you've already kind of leniently let a player live, I was like, no, that's got to be. There's no way I can write this into a story without it being really obvious that we're just keeping you alive for the sake of it. I mean, they were literally disintegrated in like the D&D version of a nuke, which is like alchemist fire. And it was like, there's no way back from that. You're not getting resurrected. There's nobody to resurrect. So I said, that's it, you're dead. And that was the end of the Curse of Strahd campaign. And by this point, I'd done a lot of writing about the quest structure and what direction I wanted the new campaign to get in. So I started work in earnest and translating that into Roll20. So I have now got this new campaign, and there's going to be tie-ins to those previous campaigns, which is why I wanted to do this video first before I release any of the videos of us playing it, because there's going to be characters from the other campaigns. Because the campaign I've written is called Return to Phandalin, and as the name suggests, it is a return to the town of Phandalin, and I decided to set this 30 years after the campaign with Grum and Noah and Mithril and Grey, and I decided to write the campaign around the world and what had happened because of the actions of their first campaign, and even a little bit from the very first campaign I did. There'll be some write-in from that. So I wanted to tie it into those actions. I wanted to tie it into my Tales from the Forgotten Realms short stories I did, and I wanted to possibly even tie it into the Curse of Strahd stuff we did at some point. That hasn't happened yet. I'm thinking of ways to do that to a degree, which I can't say now because it's all secret, super secret, but it will be revealed on time. But yeah, there's going to be characters from the previous campaign. There's going to be NPCs which died from the previous campaign. There's going to be children who were children in Phandalin who are now adults as new NPCs, and some of the older NPCs will have died within those 30 years. So I thought this was a really lovely idea for it to be a setting which was familiar yet new. It was familiar because even Grey does make an appearance, which you'll see if you watch the first one, quite early on. He's one of the main sort of story-driving NPCs of this one, and he was George's player character, so that in itself they reacted really nicely to. They were like, oh, this is brilliant, we've built this. And obviously the tavern he built, which was what George wanted his character to do, is the main sort of tavern which they first meet in. So straight away they're thrust into this new but familiar setting, and I think it's going to be something really special. I really hope it is. I hope it's going to be enjoyable to watch as well as it is enjoyable to play, and it's been really enjoyable to create it as well. So I hope you enjoy it. As I said, I'll be putting the videos up on YouTube. Be patient with me. It's going to be a little while before the first one comes up because we forgot to record the video for it, so I'm having to build some images and manually edit it together to obviously give you guys some visual to what is being said. So I'm working on that at the moment, but it should be out soon, and we will make sure we're recording the Roll20 video from Katie's point of view, so it'll be from her character's point of view and what she sees. We'll record that for the following sessions, And as I said, I'm not sure if Sanzi's streaming it. He might be. But if he is, you can probably catch it on his Twitch channel if you are really keen to go. So yeah, that's the brief history of my world. I don't want to give away too much more because obviously this campaign's opening the world up, and you'll start to see more of my take on the Forgotten Realms through it. And I hope you enjoy it. And I'm sure there will be some people who go, oh, that's not how you do it. That's not. I do homebrew a bit, so bear with me. I have sort of built some of my own systems. I've sort of stolen little bits I've liked from other systems and implemented them in my game and maybe adjusted them slightly. So it's not full, completely by the book 5th ed. It mainly is. It mainly runs on 5th edition, and that is a good benchmark for anyone really. But it's got lots of little bits of lore and little fresh little touches of characters from my version as well, and from my players who are their imaginations themselves are wonderful, and it is a pleasure for me to build a world around their ideas and my own. So I hope you enjoy, and I'm sure I will speak to you soon. Take care, and thanks for tuning in.